All right, let's take a trip back to the 1990s. We're talking tracksuits, swagger, and a whole lot of guitars. This is the story of Britpop, a musical revolution that didn't just define a decade for the UK, but for a moment, it made the entire world sit up and listen. So picture this. It's the early 90s, and there's this new sense of optimism kind of sweeping across Britain. It just felt like things were changing, like things were on the up. And a feeling that big, well, it needs a soundtrack. And down in the pubs, the clubs, and council estates all over the country, a new wave of bands was getting ready to absolutely explode. Now, to really get Britpop, you've got to look across the Atlantic. At the time, American grunge was king. You know the vibe: Nirvana, plaid shirts, angst, a lot of disillusionment. It was incredible for sure, but man, was it bleak. And over in the UK, a whole new generation of musicians wanted the exact opposite. They wanted something loud, proud, and completely unapologetically British. And this wasn't just some new sound popping up. No, this was a conscious pushback. It was a very, very British reaction against the chokehold that American rock had on everything. You can actually trace the real catalyst for Britpop back to one band and one truly terrible trip. So, in 1991, the band Blur lands in America for a tour. They're all set to take the country by storm. But, and you can't make this up, on the exact day they arrive, Nirvana's album Nevermind is released. And just like that, Blur's sound felt totally out of step. The tour was an absolute disaster. So they came home just fed up. As this quote shows, they made a decision: no more chasing American tastes. Instead, they were going to dive headfirst into everything British. The singer, Damon Albarn, started writing these amazing lyrics about Sunday roasts, betting shops, the whole suburban experience. And that new direction, it led straight to their album Modern Life is Rubbish, which is like one of the foundational records of the whole Britpop sound. Okay, so while Blur were finding their new direction, another band, Suede, just lit the fuse. They were everything grunge wasn't: theatrical, androgynous, glamorous. And the British music press, they went into total overdrive. In February '93, Melody Maker magazine declared them the best new band in Britain before they'd even put an album out. Then, just 2 months later, Select magazine put them on this legendary Yanks Go Home cover, and right there gave the movement its name: Britpop. So the scene now has a name. It's got its first heroes, but it was about to get its superstars. A band was coming that was going to take all of this to a completely different level. While London's scene was bubbling, a hurricane was brewing up north in Manchester, and its name was Oasis. They basically took the classic songwriting of the Beatles and mixed it with the swagger of their local heroes, the Stone Roses. And at the heart of it all were the Gallagher brothers: Noel, the genius songwriter, and Liam, the confrontational, can't take your eyes off him frontman. It was a perfect and perfectly explosive combination. This quote from Noel Gallagher just captures their mindset perfectly. They weren't just hoping to make it big. They genuinely believed they were destined to be the biggest band in the world, and they told anyone who would listen. That rock-solid confidence was a massive part of their appeal. And you know what? They backed up all that arrogance with actual results. This number you're seeing, 86,000. That's how many copies their debut album, Definitely Maybe, sold in its very first week. At the time, that made it the fastest-selling debut album in British history. But here's the thing. It was never just about Blur and Oasis. The whole country was buzzing. You had Pulp up in Sheffield, who finally broke through after more than a decade with these brilliant, witty songs about class. You had Elastica in London bringing this spiky, female-led punk energy. And down in Oxford, Supergrass delivered pure, youthful fun. The scene was diverse, and it was absolutely on fire. So this explosion of talent and hype, it was all building towards something. It was leading to an epic showdown that would become the absolute peak of the entire movement. And this was about way more than just music. It was about identity. In the summer of '95, the two biggest bands in the country, Blur and Oasis, decided, or were maybe pushed, to release their new singles on the exact same day. The media, of course, went absolutely wild, framing it as nothing less than a battle for the soul of Britain. The media pitched it as this perfect rivalry: North versus South. The working-class lads from a Manchester council estate versus the middle-class art school kids from London. In the end, Blur's single Country House outsold Oasis's Roll With It. On paper, Blur had won the battle. And just to give you a sense of how massive this was, think about it. a fight for the #1 spot on the pop charts was the lead story on the national evening news. This thing had gone way beyond the music pages. It was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. But what happens when the hype gets that big? It just can't last forever, can it? The incredible highs of 1995 were, maybe inevitably, followed by a pretty serious come-down. The party was starting to wind down. And the dark side of that hype was immediate and honestly pretty brutal. On the very night that Blur won the chart battle, their guitarist, Graham Coxon, felt so empty and just disgusted by the whole media circus that he seriously contemplated suicide. The pressure was already causing these huge cracks to appear. And here's the real twist in the story. Blur might have won that week's chart battle, but Oasis absolutely, decisively won the war. Their second album, Morning Glory, with massive global hits like Wonderwall, went on to become one of the biggest selling albums of the entire decade, not just in the UK, but all over the world. The end came pretty quickly after that. In 1996, Oasis played to 250,000 people at Nebworth. That was the absolute peak. I mean, get this, 4% of the entire UK population applied for tickets. It's insane. But their very next album, Be Here Now, was a critical failure. And by '98, the whole scene was fracturing as the biggest bands realized they had to change their sound or just disappear. And that shift? It was dramatic. Blur, the very band that kicked the whole thing off by rejecting American music, scored their biggest international hit with Song 2, which was basically a 2-minute parody of grunge. And Pulp followed up their celebratory breakthrough album with this dark, cynical record called This Is Hardcore. The stars of Britpop were actively running away from the very label they had helped create. So, after all that sound and all that fury, what did it all mean? What was the real, lasting impact of this bright, brief, and incredibly loud moment in music? Well, it was the soundtrack to something much bigger, a phenomenon that got the name Cool Britannia. For a few years there, Britpop really fueled this period of genuine national confidence and cultural pride. It honestly felt like Britain was the center of the world again. When you boil it down, Britpop was more than just a fad. It put working-class voices and their stories right at the heart of mainstream culture. It gave us anthems that totally defined a generation. But maybe its most important legacy is this. It was the last great tribe. The last time a single music scene could unite a country's youth like that, before the internet came along and changed everything. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? Britpop was so powerful because it perfectly captured a specific feeling of hope in a specific place at a specific time. But in our modern world, this globalized, terminally online world, is it even possible for a music scene to have that kind of unifying national impact ever again?